ships have already set out. The Kremlin's July storm. Exercises or a new war? Putin has no intention of stopping. Is Russia getting a second wind? Pokrovsk is on fire. Did they enter or not? What is really happening in the city? Watch right now.
The new Putin elite, that is, the so-called heroes of the so-called special military operation, never cease to amaze. For example, a war participant from the Tyumen region killed his wife on their wedding night.
At some point, Alexei stabbed Marina in the chest. The woman died from blood loss. Marchuk had previously been prosecuted for disorderly conduct, and he had already beaten Marina before ultimately stabbing her to death. The court sentenced the hero to 12.5 years.
Only after the court's verdict did he announce that he wanted to return to the front. And in Novosibirsk, a participant of the special military operation spent 3 months in a row robbing stores and frightening the shop assistants. He would simply walk into a store with a huge knife and take whatever he wanted. But it's not just at home or on the front lines that Putin's soldiers continue to prove their inhumanity. In the Donetsk region, Russian occupiers deliberately shot a local resident who was riding a bicycle, finishing him off with additional shots. Sometime later, Ukrainian soldiers found these occupiers and eliminated them. The armed forces of Ukraine also continue to hold back the enemy on various sections of the front. The situation remains difficult in the Pokrovsk direction, where the enemy continues its offensive. You remember that enemy sabotage groups broke into the city? Their elimination is still ongoing.
At the moment, the occupiers are trying to expand their presence along the flanks of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, primarily in the area of Mayorat. Currently, the occupiers are attempting to advance from the area of the settlement of Razino near the mine and to take direct control of the locations of the Ukrainian Defense Forces. This is the only paved road. In addition, the enemy is trying to attack simultaneously with a wide flank, specifically in the area of Novoekonomichne. This is the so-called tactic of small encirclements. In other words, it is the threat of operational encirclement aimed at forcing units of Ukrainian defense forces out of their positions.
Meanwhile, the Kremlin is preparing for a large-scale war and plans to spend about $1 trillion on rearmament by the end of 2036. This is the largest armament program by the aggressor country since the collapse of the Soviet Union. As part of the military reform, Russia has already created 2 new military districts, the Moscow and Leningrad districts. The formation of new divisions, units and military formations is also planned.
Russian budget spending specifically on the defense sector in 2025 will amount to $149 billion. For comparison, this figure has increased by 38% compared to the previous year, which indicates further militarization of both the Russian economy and, accordingly, the total mobilization of the political and informational components of the Russian Federation.
These actions are yet another confirmation that the Kremlin is preparing for a large-scale war with NATO, states a new analytical report from the Institute for the Study of War.
The Russian Federation is considering the possibility of escalating tensions directly on the borders with NATO countries and the possibility of a direct invasion of NATO territory, primarily referring to the Baltic states. In addition, the Russian Federation is already making territorial claims against Sweden regarding the island of Gotland.
While Moscow is making plans, Ukraine may receive even more Patriot systems. The US Department of Defense is negotiating possible bilateral agreements to supply Kyiv with additional American air defense systems.
At the moment, several European countries are considering the possibility of transferring Patriot systems. First and foremost, this concerns Germany, the Netherlands, and accordingly the possibility of transferring air defense systems. It's not just about Patriot systems, but also NASAMS, which is Norway. So we can say that a number of countries have already announced the possibility of expediting the transfer of air and missile defense systems to meet the needs of the armed forces of Ukraine.
And finally, it is likely that Moscow interpreted Trump's 5-day ultimatum as a carte blanche for an offensive in Ukraine. After all, many Russian officials considered the threats from the American president to be softer than expected, writes The Guardian.
This does not correspond to reality. This is the Russian Federation's attempt to put on a brave face in a losing situation. At this point, we are already talking about comprehensive pressure from the United States, primarily targeting the economic sector of the Russian Federation. This is not only a collective decision by defense industry countries to increase oil production, which accordingly automatically leads to a decrease in oil prices, but also correspondingly the 18th package of sanctions from EU countries.
So far, despite the sanctions and the critical situation in the Russian economy, Putin continues the war. After all, he simply cannot show weakness or admit failures on the front.
A nuclear sensation. The US has returned super powerful weapons to Europe. A new generation nuclear bomb is already in Britain. NATO is strengthening. Russia is preparing for the worst. A crucial decision has already been made. Washington is betting on nuclear escalation. Everything is heading in that direction.
For the first time in 17 years, Washington has brought weapons of mass destruction to Britain. The US has delivered the most advanced version of bombs, which are the main nuclear weapons of America's strategic forces, to its largest European airbase. However, neither the American nor the British authorities have commented in any way on the alleged deployment of these weapons.
The first information about the possible return of nuclear weapons to the territory of the United Kingdom dates back to 2022. At that time, Western media reported that the United States was reconstructing this facility, which had been effectively mothballed in 2008, and accordingly, the actions of the United States should be seen as a gradual return to the tactics of nuclear deterrence, which was one of the defining features of the NATO bloc. This also applies to the foreign policy course of the United Kingdom.
As reported by British publications, last week B-61-12 thermonuclear bombs were delivered to a newly built secure storage facility at the Lakenheath Air Base in eastern England. Thus, the United Kingdom became the sixth country in Europe to host US nuclear weapons.
In March, Polish President Andrzej Duda called on the United States to deploy nuclear capabilities on his country's territory as a possible preventive measure to deter a military invasion by the Russian Federation from the territory of the Republic of Belarus. In addition, on the 5th of March, French President Emmanuel Macron stated that his country is ready to deploy its nuclear capabilities on the territory of a number of European countries.
The B-61-12G Gravity bombs have a yield of up to 50 kilotons, which is more than 3 times the power of the atomic weapon dropped on Hiroshima in 1945. Simply put, it's like having 4 bombs in one.
This weapon is considered one of the most versatile in the United States nuclear arsenal. Its development began back in the 1960s, and since then there have been 12 modifications. It should be noted that the B-61-12H has 4 possible yield settings, which is quite remarkable, ranging from 0.3 to 50 kilotons. Accordingly, the development of the latest modification, the B-61-12, began in 2008.
American nuclear weapons had already been stationed at the Lakenheath base in the UK during the Cold War, but they were completely removed from there in 2008 as part of arms reductions in Europe. The likely return of nuclear weapons is part of a program to develop and modernize nuclear facilities in response to heightened tensions with the Kremlin following Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
Back in March 2025, Trump called on the Russian Federation and China to pursue nuclear disarmament, but he did not receive any corresponding political signal from either the Russian Federation or, accordingly, China. And against the backdrop of recent statements by the political leadership of the Russian Federation about the possibility of a nuclear strike on the territory of the United Kingdom, the return of the nuclear arsenal to this country serves as a warning to the Russian Federation and makes it clear that the United States is prepared to respond appropriately to nuclear threats from the Russian Federation.
Earlier, Russia had already stated that the deployment of American weapons in the United Kingdom would be regarded by Moscow as an escalation and would be met with compensatory countermeasures.
Currently, 5 nuclear facilities are being modernized on the territory of the Russian Federation itself. And this indicates that the Russian Federation is sending a political signal to the United States that it has, in fact, effectively denounced the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. There are 11 nuclear facilities located on the territory of the Russian Federation, but problems with the Russian budget, namely the lack of funds, currently allow for the reconstruction of only 5 facilities. And according to the Russian side's own assessment, this will once again turn into a long-term construction project and yet another set of corruption monuments to the Russian Ministry of Defense.
On the 24th of June, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom announced plans to purchase F-35A fighter jets from the United States, which are capable of carrying B-61-12 nuclear bombs. This purchase represents the largest strengthening of the United Kingdom's nuclear capability in a generation.